Good evening, members of council. Over the last few months, maybe some of you have seen on Facebook or some other places, we've been asking people to look at the makeup of their service line that comes into their house. So I just thought it's probably pertinent to come to council, give you some updates kind of on where we are, why we're doing this, and kind of where this is heading. So there's a thing in place called the lead and copper rule. It was put in place in 1991 by the EPA, basically just to protect public health and reduce lead exposure to people. So what they did in 91 is they reduced the action level from 50 parts per billion down to 15. They required annual testing of customer taps, and then we can't exceed the action level in more than 10% of our samples. So a city of about 50,000, we collect about 30 samples when we do a sample event, so we can't have more than 3 that exceed. And then common sources of lead in drinking water are lead pipes, the service lines that serve a house, and then brass and bronze faucets at one time were made with certain amounts of lead. So some of you may or may not remember, but Minot has had a little history with this rule. Back in 1997, we exceeded the action level. There's some debate as to what caused it. At that time, we had switched disinfectants. We went from straight chloramine to chloramination. There have been some other cities in the country that have had similar instances of exceeding the lead and copper level along with a disinfectant change. And then kind of at the same time, there was a change at the water plant to a different corrosion control product. And there's some theories that could have exacerbated the disinfection issue. So not exactly sure what caused it, but back then the staff went to work to try to fix it. So we were back in compliance by 1999. And basically, to get in compliance, at that time, we discontinued use of the Souris River. We needed a good stable source of water. The Souris River during the spring, during runoff, can get extremely soft. During the summer, it can get extremely hard. So there's a really varying quality. So we wanted to run, slightly higher calcium levels. So we needed a standard baseline that we could run it. So we abandoned the Souris River at that time. We increased our sampling to try to get a handle on where this was happening and why it was happening. And then we switched to over the course of those 2 years, we used quite a few different products to varying success. And we landed on one that basically got us in compliance and has kind of held us there. We haven't seen any improvements. Every time we do a sample event, we still have a couple samples that test above the action level, but we haven't seen any improvements in those. So I'll get into that a little bit later. But and we've remained in compliance since the late 90s. So we've been put on reduced monitoring, so we pull samples every 3 years now. And then we've maintained the product that we use. It's a phosphate product. It's called tetrasodium pyrophosphate. It's NSF approved, and it's used in a drinking water system for corrosion control, or one of many phosphates that can be used in a drinking water system for corrosion control. So here's where some of the issues come in. That rule was published in the 90s, so now they're updating the rule. They've started this years ago. We've worked with other communities in the state. We've provided comment to the American Water Works Association, to the League of Cities on some of the issues that we see with the rule. So they've been contemplating those, but kind of some of the directions that they're heading is basically they want complete and total replacement of all lead service lines in the country within the next 10 years. I think there was about $11.5 billion worth of money in the infrastructure bill that's being used to back up some grants in the state. So it's going to be a pretty big lift at some point. So one of the first components of that is we need to complete a complete inventory of all service lines in the city of Minot. There will be some new sampling requirements. They call it the first and fifth liter. So right now, when we do a lead sample in a house, we tell the homeowner to let their water sit overnight for at least 6 hours. And then we want the first 1 liter sample from a tap in the morning after it's sat. Now they're going to do first and fifth. So now you'll pull the first, then you'll dump out the next four and grab the fifth. That's a sample that is fairly assured is coming directly from the service line and not from the plumbing in the house, so they can differentiate between the two. There'll be a lot of mandatory testing in all the schools, daycare facilities. And then the rule is going to establish a trigger level of 10 parts per billion, which is about 5 ppb below the action level. And this is going to trigger mandatory replacements. Alderman Padragula and I were discussing this afternoon when he called me, and I have 3% on the screen, and now I've read a couple different numbers. So it might be 10%, because if you do 3% per year, you're never going to get all of your lines replaced in 10 years. So I think that might be 10%, but I have a little extra homework to do there. But this is something that's all coming into play still. Then there'll be a lot of increased public notification as part of the program. So the expected final rule is expected to publish in late 2024 of this year. And then the rule wouldn't take effect for 3 years, so in 2027. We've been hearing that the final rule is going to be published for probably the better part of 2 years. So we still don't know if it's going to be published later this year, but the expectation is that it is. So maybe for starters, what is a lead service line? So this is a clear pic that kind of shows. So you've got the water main in the street, and the service line is just the water line that connects from the main into the house. The issue that we're going to have when we get into lead service line replacements is now you have a property line boundary. So the city of Minot is going to be responsible for lead and copper testing and replacement of service lines on private property of a private utility. The city does not own the service line into a house from the curb stop into the water meter. So there'll be some things for us to consider there as we go forward, we get into these. Lead service lines, if we use state revolving fund dollars through the state, we'll have, there's a 66% grant funded, but there'll still be the issue of the 34%. If we are mandated to get into somebody's house and replace a service line, generally going down the road of like a special assessment is probably not going to be, probably not going to find a compliant homeowner that is willing to let us in and then sign them up for a, potentially $1,000 bill or whatever it is. So we'll have to talk through these. My recommendation is probably that we do this just like we do water main replacement projects. And we work with the homeowners. We basically take over ownership, we replace it and turn it back to them. There's a lot of communities that are doing programs similar to that. But these will be things that we'll have to consider as we start getting more into this. This is a snapshot of a portal that we have where people can log on and they can indicate the material makeup. So red is lead, gray is unknown, blue is copper. So as you can see, lots of gray. We have about 16,000 service lines total. We still have about 8,265 unknowns. So with the EPA, we can submit this inventory. Anything that's an unknown is assumed to be lead. So where this becomes an issue is if we get into mandatory replacements. Now we're doing 10% of 8,000 instead of 10% of maybe it's only 1,000 actual lead lines that we have. So the inventory piece over the next couple of years is going to be pretty important for us to keep working through. Some of the identification, we've gone through a lot of public records. We have tie cards for just about every residence in town. We're asking homeowners to do the on-site visual. There can be some water testing where you can look for trace amounts of lead in samples. And then worst case scenario, we have to get into excavation where we have to dig at the curb stop and then look at the two service lines at that point. These are the different lines that people can come across when they look at them in their house. Lead is item number one. It's pretty noticeable due to the kind of the bulged fittings where there's connections made. Iron, there's probably not, we haven't come across a lot of iron in the system, but copper, and then there is poly. So if anybody needs help identifying, we'd be more than welcome to come out and give them a hand. And just to show the difficulty in the excavation method, probably the first time in my life I ever wished I lived in Texas. So the simple that I show on the left, that's, in a lot of parts of the country, that's where their water meters are. They're right next to the street. They're under a cover about a foot deep. You can look in the hole and you can identify both materials on either side of the water meter. In Minot, we have we're lucky to get frost depths in excess of 4, 6, 8 feet. So everything is tried to be buried 8.5 feet deep. So the picture you see on the right, that's a guy down in the bottom of a trench box next to a service line. We can do these identifications without sending a man down there, so we shouldn't have to dig a hole of that magnitude, but they're still going to be 6 to 8.5 feet deep to try to identify these. And then the picture on the far right, that is actually a lead service line that transitions to a short piece of copper before the curb stops. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. This is kind of our timeline. A lot of the records review is mostly complete, and we're ongoing with a lot of the visual inspections in the homes. Then we'll have to submit our inventory to the DEQ by October of this year. Any lines that have been identified as copper, we're done. We don't have to do anything with those any further. Anything that's listed as other, we'll have to do some public notification later this year. And then beyond that, it'll be the monitoring and the replacement program that would probably start. So if the rule is delayed until 2027, our first year of compliance sampling would be in 2028. And then we would have our first round of mandatory replacements, if we hit the trigger level, would be in 2029. So we have time, which is a good thing. So we can work through these options of trying to identify some stuff. But it's still a big task in front of us. So our action plan, continue to research and monitor, and then continue trying to ID all these unknown service lines, whether that's through additional home inspections or if we have to go to excavation. Some of the SRF loans, they will pay 66% of lead identification projects. So we could hire a contractor to go around town and excavate and identify, and we can get grant funding for that. So that's something I'll be looking into. And then one of the things that we are going to do at the plant is we're going to switch corrosion control products. I just wanted to be upfront and let the council know. At this point, we don't expect that the product we're switching to is going to create, a worse issue than we already have. But there's always a possibility. We're going to go through a lot of changes here in the next couple of years in the city of Minot. We're going to go from what we've had as groundwater for the last, 100 years probably, and we're going to be transitioning to Lake Sakakawea water here in the next year and a half. So different water source, different chemistries, and all these things could have an effect. But these are all things that the state, it's going to trigger a lot of additional testing. We're going to have mandated lead testing when we switch source water. So we'll continue to work through all this, keep watching the product that we're switching to, see if our hope is that a different product will maybe lower some of these levels and get us below the trigger level. If we can get into the trigger level, then we can address the lead service line replacements kind of on our time schedule and according to our 10-year plan, instead of having the mandatory and having to go through all these 8,000 unknowns. And we could be digging where there's not lead, so we just have to get our hands wrapped around that inventory a little bit better to give us an idea of what these replacements will look like. Right now, I think we currently have about 285 known lead service lines, so a lot less than 8,000. So we need to find what that number is between those two numbers, and it's a pretty wide range. And with that, I would just stop for questions. Like I said, I just wanted council to be aware of, as we're posting stuff on Facebook, why we're doing it, and we'll continue to do it. And you may see some projects come through to help us do identification. So just wanted you aware.
Carrie.
When, I didn't get a sense of when an excavation would be necessary. Like, won't an in-home inspection always lead to identification, or not always, and then you'd have to excavate?
Mayor Ross, Alderwoman Evans. So basically, there's two sides to a lead service line, the homeowner side and the city side. So we have to identify both sides. So if the homeowner identifies their side as being copper, there is a possibility that it's connected to a lead service line that the city put in back in the early 1900s. So we have to identify both sides of the curb stop. That's the issue.
So when citizens are telling you what they're seeing inside their home, that could be copper, but there could be lead from the home to the curb stop.
It still could be.
So how, excavation's the only way we would know that, though? Because like, as a homeowner, I can't see what's coming out of my home to the curb stop.
Right. So we have tracing capability. We can hook a tracer onto a curb stop, and that'll impart a current into the service line. So we can tell with a fairly high level of confidence, the difference between copper and lead. They're both conductive, but we can see a difference when we trace a lead line versus a copper line. The EPA currently says that that's not an acceptable way of identification, so we're working through that. The last I got from the state is the state said they're researching, and unfortunately, the EPA, when they're researching, they don't research quickly. It takes them quite a while to come out with kind of their final ruling on things. But that'll be one thing that we're kind of pushing for is some different methods of identification than excavation, because it's a real pain.
So this past year, when, most of the neighborhoods by Job Corps were getting the water main replacements and the service lines were being dug up, were those, please tell me, those like contractors were doing IDs of the service lines?
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, because that was, you know what I mean, like a few hundred homes that could, okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Every year, we're doing some much larger scale water main replacement projects last year and then this year, once we get our projects out for bid. So we're taking, probably in the neighborhood of 200 to 350 homes off the unknown list just by doing those projects. So that helps, but.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
Lisa.
Thank you. So, here, true confessions tonight. I have seen this on Facebook and I haven't looked because I made an assumption that I lived in a newer neighborhood with newer construction. Is there any kind of date in there where if your development or your home was built after a certain time, you're pretty confident that it's not a lead line?
Yes. Mayor Ross, Alderwoman Olson. So anything built after 1986 can be assumed to be copper. And I think I think that snapshot I showed of our portal with all the blue dots, I think those are indications of all the post-86 built houses. So I can look at yours and verify.
Thank you.
Ready.
Mark.
I would just encourage everybody to participate in the survey. After Jason and I talked the other day, I went and snapped a picture of mine, and it turned out that it's poly, so that was good. And my house was built in 1980, so I'm kind of right on the line there. But it's easy to snap a picture and upload it and help out a little bit. So.
Thank you.
Scott.
Have you talked to realtors at all? I mean, obviously there aren't enough houses in town for sale, but there are houses for sale. Look to them as experts on this.
Mayor Ross, Alderman Burlingame, no, that's not a direction. We've worked with the assessors and the building officials. They're in a lot of homes. So I think that they've been trying to get data for us. The realtors are one that I haven't. So that's one I can think of. Yeah, we can look into that.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you.